Welcome back to the Tip of the Iceberg podcast, brought to you as always by InsideThePenguins.com. We teased that two players at the AHL level have started to light it up in recent weeks, two players that could be pivotal for the Pittsburgh Penguins down the stretch, and that is the Killer Peas or the Pool Party or whatever wrestling faction name you want to give these two players. But Sam Poulin and Jesse Puljujarvi have been taking over at the AHL level over the past week. Poulin has goals, or had goals, I should say, in 4 straight games before last night's performance. Jesse Puljujarvi in his last 2 games have put up 3 points, 2 of them being goals, and the third being a beautiful cross-ice assist to Ty Smith in a losing effort last night for the Wilkes-Barre Penguins against the Providence Bruins, So those two players perform a little bit better. Certainly, when you look at Jesse Puljujarvi, somebody coming off a double hip surgery, the early returns weren't great, but he's starting to pick things up at the AHL level.
Coming off of double hip surgery and about a half a season off.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone was expecting him to go in game 1 and be like, oh, he looks back to normal. No, that just wasn't going to happen. I think saying his early returns weren't great is next to nothing, really. That was, it is what it is. What were you expecting to see? That being said, it seems like now here he is, a handful of games in. I still would expect him to be fully up to speed at this point, but 3 points in a couple of games, that's not bad. It's a good step in the right direction, especially considering, he's looking to earn a spot. This isn't a guy that was already under contract and he's got his role. This is a guy looking to literally earn an entire deal in the NHL. The Penguins are giving him the opportunity, and he's, it might still take time for more growth, but he's getting there. And like I said, 3 points in the matter of, is it 5 games?
I think he's played 5. Yeah, let me look that up.
Yeah, 3 points in the matter of 5 or 6 games is already more than I would have expected coming off of a double hip surgery and literally half of a season off. He didn't have a training camp, didn't have a preseason, and barely skated up until joining the Penguins.
Yeah, 3 points in 6 games for Jesse Puljujarvi. Obviously, both of them coming in the previous 2 games. But I think when you look at him, it's going to be a touch-and-go process. Yeah. It's not going to be, hey, he scored in 4 straight games. Let's sign him to a contract and get him to the NHL, particularly because there is a guy in Sam Poulin that might be ahead of him in the list, and we'll get to that in a second. There is a guy in Colin White who, as we talked about in the last segment, is getting an opportunity here that they're going to give him a couple of games. So there's time for Jesse Puljujarvi to play through this and to see how his hips react to playing in more and more games. There have been a couple weekends since he's been down there that they've played games in 3 straight days, and he'd play the first day, take off the second day, and come back in the third day. So once he starts playing those back-to-back days like he did this week, you start to see how his hips are going to hold up, and you start to see how he can start to hold up as time goes on. So it's going to be a touch-and-go process. It might be an up-and-down process as well, and his performance might dip and come back up very volatile, with a lot of volatility, because, who's really sure of how he's going to respond at this time? This is the second time he's had this injury. This is the second time he's had this surgery, and it seems like an injury that he's going to deal with his entire career. So obviously you have to monitor that, but somebody else coming off of an injury this year was Sam Poulin. And as we mentioned before last night, goals in 4 straight games. He's certainly starting to play a major role for that Wilkes-Barre Penguins team. The question that I have for you, Horwat, and we can get as deep into this as you want, who's first on the Penguins call sheet right now? You can even go right now or just in general at full health for both of them. But who do you think right now, if Colin White falters, which we're hoping doesn't happen, we're hoping he turns into an everyday NHLer going forward. But if there's a spot open at the NHL roster, who's first on the Penguins call sheet, Sam Poulin or Jesse Puljujarvi?
Of those two, I would have to say it's probably Sam Poulin. I'd say the fact that he has a contract might play the bigger factor. Because when it comes down to it, we don't know what Jesse Puljujarvi and his agent are looking for exactly. Whereas Sam Poulin, he's here, he's under contract, he's got his deal set, and the Penguins are able to have that movement. Whereas with Puljujarvi, I think that contract might play a bigger role than we would think, because let's say he is higher on the totem pole here, but doesn't have a deal, and the Penguins want to make that move. Well, suddenly you got to deal with an agent who might say, well, he's going with an NHL-only deal. You're not going to get a 2-way deal out of this guy. You're going to have to all of a sudden fire him through waivers if you want to send him back down. And if he performs well, which he seems to already be doing, hey, that's a cheap deal that a team can just swoop right in for.
Yeah.
So I would say Sam Poulin's going to be a first call-up out of these two. And plus, let's be real. I mean, we're still waiting for more returns from Puljujarvi in terms of games played. How does he react to these games played? Can this be a consistent process? Poulin is back, 4 goals in 4 straight, and has, we obviously has an NHL experience that he can build off of.
Mm-hmm.
Puljujarvi doesn't, but Sam Poulin has been there before as well. It's time for him to make a process. Plus, I mean, going back to the beginning of the season, Kyle Dubas said he's expecting Sam Poulin to be a regular NHL player at some point soon.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing about Puljujarvi, pretty much. But it's time to give people their dues. And while Puljujarvi's still growing in his role and his position, Sam Poulin might get a call first.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting concern that you have about the contract for Jesse Puljujarvi. I don't think that he can command too much. I mean, you look at the Pittsburgh Penguins, if it's anything more than $1.5 million, they probably can't bring him up anyway. I mean, we have to obviously monitor the Riley Smith situation, and if he gets put on LTIR, which is something we'll learn later this week. But I mean, you look at Jesse Puljujarvi, what can you command? Like, you're playing at the AHL level right now because you're trying to get back from a double hip surgery. Are you really going to be able to command, hey, I want a one-way deal? Or, I mean, one-way deal or two-way deal is
it's not here nor there.
Yeah, it's neither here nor there on that one, but like, he's going to have to go through waivers regardless.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is going to be the cap hit and the years. And I don't think he's in a position to say, hey, I want a multi-year deal coming off of a rough season in Carolina where he was injured through most of the year. And you just don't know what level he's going to get to at the NHL level anymore. So while I do understand the concern and I understand bringing that to attention, I just don't think that he's going to command all that much. I think he's probably going to ask for something around the realm of like $1 million for the remainder of the season, or maybe league minimum the remainder of the season. That way he gets to walk into free agency showing something and knowing that he can go anywhere after this season. But I do agree with you that Sam Poulin's probably first on the call sheet, simply because, one, you mentioned it, Kyle Dubas at the beginning of the season, I believe you asked the question about this, that he expects him to be an NHL player and at a pretty consistent level at some point soon. And he alluded to the fact that that could be this season. Mm-hmm. I think that there's multiple occasions this year that he would have been called up. He would have been called up late last season as well, but he's been facing injuries. Last year, he missed time, and then he came back, and then he was injured. And at that point in time, the Penguins needed a call up. They just couldn't call him up because he was injured. This season, early in the year, you look at when Vinny Hinostroza was called up. You look at when Radim Zohorna was called up. You look at when they went back to Jansen Harkins after sending him down. Who was injured? Sam Poulin. I think he's much higher on the organization's depth chart than people give him credit for. I think there's a lot of people that are growing impatient with him. Obviously, as a first-round pick in 2019, there's a lot of people that are expecting more returns. That's just not how it works all the time for first-round picks. I think you see Sam Poulin certainly at some point this season, but I think you see him as one of the next few call-ups here getting his opportunity at the NHL level.
Yeah, let's also not forget that while Sam Poulin was injured and getting rehabbed, he was doing that in Pittsburgh. He was doing that around the NHL guys. He had a stall in the locker room, which you don't normally see, right? Like that's not a regular occurrence. He had a stall in the Penguins locker room, not even in like their secondary locker room or one of the pull-in stalls. He had a stall in the middle of the locker that was around everyone else. So there's some high expectations for him, and I think it's just a matter of getting fully healthy, continuing this trend, and it seems like his game is pretty much built, ready for the NHL now. They wanted him to be able to play both sides. I don't know what the defensive returns have looked like. That's got to be hard to find at the AHL level. That's got to be a near impossible task if you're not there watching every game to see what the defense from a forward looks like. Mm-hmm. But if the coaching staff and the management group believes that it is ready, I mean, you're not going to give him the call fresh out of, or you're not going to give him the call while you're out west. That's a hell of a trip to make, especially whenever you have the personnel that can make it. Unless, barring injury, you'd expect Colin White. Like we said, we'd expect Colin White to play those 2 games. Coming out of the All-Star break, though, that could be a different story. Let's say Poulin continues his good trend. I don't know what the Wilkes-Barre schedule looks like. But if he's able to continue that trend through the Penguins bye week, through the All-Star break, and let's say Colin White fumbles the bag in these next 4 games, and let's say Riley Smith isn't able to return right away because we still don't know where that stands, that could be a good little swap there. Colin White out, Sam Poulin in.
Yeah, obviously you look at what the Pittsburgh Penguins have done with both of these players, and they've said that both of them are defensive minded. They're hard to play against, as Mike Sullivan likes to say. So I think both of them have a spot at this point at the NHL level. It's not waiting for them, but certainly one that is going to be on the way. I'm trying to look here at the Wilkes-Barre Scranton schedule. It's not easy to navigate their website, especially on the side of a podcast. But today would be January 18th. They have 4, 5, 6 games the remainder of this month. So they play more than the Pittsburgh Penguins do coming up the remainder of the month. So you look at that and you say, all right, if they can continue this performance, there's no reason why if both Puljujarvi and Poulin perform and Puuston and White struggle and Riley Smith is out, that you don't call both of them up. I mean, you look at the flexibility of a guy like Sam Poulin. You know, you've been mentioning all the time, you want Noel Acciari on the wing, and you want Lars Eller as the 4th line center if you can make it possible. If you can bring up somebody that fills the role that Lars Eller is currently in, and Lars Eller has been perfectly fine as a 3rd line center. But when you're looking to try to make this team take the next step and move up from being a bubble team on the outside looking in to a top 3 team in the Metro, if you can get Lars Eller as your 4th line center, somebody who plays at a commensurate level at his 3rd line center spot, and Noel Acciari to the wing, you're going to do that. So maybe if Sam Poulin continues his hot streak and becomes undeniable that he needs to be at the NHL level for a stretch, you bring him up and you put him at 3rd line center. You bump down Lars Eller, move over Noel Acciari. All of a sudden, it is Eller, Acciari, and Carter as your 4th line, and you have Poulin, and maybe you call up Puljujarvi, and maybe you move Puuston over to the left. I don't know. This is all Puljujarvi, Puuston would be an interesting line. I feel bad for the broadcast teams if that ends up being the Penguins' 3rd line trying to call that. But
suddenly it sounds great, and it also adds on to what I was mentioning earlier in the show. You got 3 scoring lines all of a sudden.
Yeah, that would be tending towards an offensive line, but also Poulin and Puuston and Puljujarvi. I'm already struggling with it. And Puljujarvi are expected to have really good 2-way games. So you don't know. And again, we're getting way ahead of ourselves with this because this is a 1-week sample that both Poulin and Puljujarvi have been playing very well. Meanwhile, Puuston's been struggling, so it might even be at his expense that one of these guys get called up. But I mean, it certainly gives you options if these guys can continue to perform. And I think that's one thing that we have to look at is the Pittsburgh Penguins are going to hope that the internal options step up as opposed to having to look outside the organization to bring in help in the bottom 6.
Yeah, and let's not forget to mention that Riley Smith could be perfectly okay. And if we're rolling with this, and if we're rolling with this 3rd line that we just created in our minds and giving broadcasters and writers heart palpitations trying to write that, Riley Smith could be an easy piece to also slide in on the left side of that. You know, let's say Valtteri Puuston, like we said, isn't performing at his level. Suddenly you got Sam Poulin centering Jesse Puljujarvi and Riley Smith. I mean, we're in goofy land now. Like I said, welcome to mid to late January, all of February leading up to the trade deadline. Things are just going to get weird and goofy. It's just the way it is. Also, let's not forget that he doesn't have to sign a deal before then, but Jesse Puljujarvi, if he wants to play in the postseason with the Penguins, if that happens, would have to have a deal by the trade deadline. So decisions will be made quickly there as well.
Yeah, I would believe that. I mean, we saw there's 6 games remaining in January. He's already played 6. He only has 25 that he can play on a PTO with the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. So I'd assume that there's at least 13 games in February for the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. So he'd have to sign one anyway. But
you can also always just restart a PTO though. That 25 is just a limit, and then you could just sign another.
Well.
But you're right.
Interesting. I would doubt that they'd get to that point and be like, yeah, we're going to sign you to another PTO. Like,
that's it's rare, but I'm pretty sure you could just do it.
Also, as you mentioned, they're not testing him out for next year. Like they're trying to get him up to speed and hoping that he can play for the Pittsburgh Penguins this season. So they're not going to sign him to do another PTO simply because the trade deadline would be a couple days after that. And like you mentioned, they'd have to have him on the roster, at least under contract, to be able to be eligible for the Stanley Cup playoffs. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what the Penguins want him for. They want him to come up and be an NHLer for this team. And him and Poulin, they've played well, and we'll have to keep monitoring how they play at the AHL level, but certainly a nice week for those two. And it certainly gives a little bit of hope for Pittsburgh Penguins fans looking for some reinforcements coming from the AHL level.